Good evening, chippers. Isn't it a wonderful thing? Here we are in what is considered to be the meat and potatoes capital of the world, and we have over 3,000 people that have basically come together and learned a new lifestyle. You know, I understand somewhat about what you've gone through. I'm a fourth generation farmer, rancher, feedlot operator from Montana. And I assure you that Montana is not the plant-eating capital of the world. I am probably the only cattleman that has ever been elected to the president of the International Vegetarian Union. But I hope I'm not the last. Because we are on the cutting edge right now of a time in history where we must change. We have more people on the planet today than have ever existed. There are twice as many here today as the day I was born. If I live the age I want to live to, that number will double again. Can you imagine? We will quadruple the number of people that are on the planet the day I die compared to what was here the day that I was born. And it's an amazing thing. Today, the United States of America, I was a factory farmer. For every pound of meat that I put on a plate, I took 16 pounds of grain to do it. 16 pounds of grain would feed 32 people, or one Rush Limbaugh. Now, which is the best use of our resources? Now, I've had a lot of people come to me and say, wait a minute, we continue to feed meat to Rush, it's going to get him. And I say to them, that's an interesting idea. I'm not sure it's the Christian approach, but it is an interesting idea. But you know, the future of our children and grandchildren will depend on what you have learned. I don't want you to walk out of here tonight. I don't want you to walk out and say to everybody you go by, look, I am a CHIP graduate. And you will see the veil go over their eyes. They don't want to hear it. You want to walk out of here tonight and you want to walk your talk. You want to be the future. And when those people come up and tap you on the shoulder and they say to you, are you one of those chippers? Then you can turn around and say, you better believe it. Then they're ready to listen. Then they're ready to hear. You know, I was raised in Montana. Second World War. My parents had a small dairy farm. They could not hire any help. That meant my mother and father, they were milking cows. My brother, two sisters, and I were raised by my grandparents. Now back then, daycare was considerably different than what it is today. No swings, no slides, no Lego blocks. Back then, daycare was working in the garden. My first job was to collect ladybugs and put them into a jar. Not to kill them, but the more ladybugs, the healthier the garden was. I thought it was the Garden of Eden. I never found anything I loved more than putting my hands in real, live, living soil. The birds and the trees, I was sure it was the Garden of Eden. All I ever wanted to be was a farmer. What a piece of cake. My parents owned a farm. I wanted to be a farmer. 12 years I could go to school. I didn't have to do anything but party and play football. I was very good at that. I never missed a party. I never took a book home. Believe it or not, my senior year, they came to me and they said, Lyman, you are going to graduate. Almost had the big one. Couldn't hardly believe it. And if you think it was tough for me, can you imagine what it was like for my instructors? Lyman's going to graduate? But I figured that out. They looked at it and they said, look, this guy's so doggone dumb, we don't graduate him, he may come back. We don't want a chance like that. And so I graduated. I was thrilled to death. I was going to go home. I was going to be a farmer. No problem. I knew how to farm. You put the seed in the ground, you step back, you allow it to grow, harvest the crop, bank the money, no problem being a farmer, I could handle that. Wow, that farm was a business to run. I didn't have the tools to run a business, I'd dumber than a post. But I didn't let that bother me any. I did what most good red-blooded American youth 12 years ago into school and don't learn anything. I just went on to the university. I went to the university because I wanted to be an agribusinessman. Now, I couldn't spell agribusiness, but I knew that's what I wanted to be. I learned a thing about herbicides, pesticides, hormones, medication. I soaked up that information like a sponge. I learned better living through chemistry. I graduated with a degree in agriculture. I raced home to see my father, and I said to him, move over, Pa, I want to take this one-horse operation. I'm going to turn it into an agribusiness. And he looked at me and he said, what in the world is that? And I said, oh man, haven't you heard? Better living through chemistry. Out of the way, I got a paper to prove I'm smart, no problem. I took that small farm, and over a series of years, I got it to a place where I had 7,000 head of cattle, 12,000 acres of crop, 30 employees. I can tell you, the first time I wrote a check for $1 million, man, I thought I was the Donald Trump of agriculture. No problem. I was on top of the world. I considered myself Farmer of the Year, 1979. And along came a wake-up call. I ended up paralyzed from the waist down. The doctors told me, he said, you have a tumor on your spinal cord. If that tumor is on the inside of the cord, you will have less than 1 chance in 1,000,000 you will ever walk again. 1 chance in 1,000,000? What they were saying to me is, hey, sucker, pick out the wheelchair you like. You're going to be in it the rest of your life. I knew what they were saying. And there I was in the hospital, and a lot of things going through my mind. And it wasn't about 7,000 head of cattle or 30 employees. It was about 7,000 cattle? No. It was about birds and trees and living soil. I was buying hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of chemicals, and I was killing the birds, killing the trees. I was turning the soil into something that looked like asbestos. And I wondered that night, 1 chance in 1,000,000. Take 1,000,000 tennis balls, put them in a parking lot, blindfold yourself. Only one of them has an X on it. Turn around 10 times, dive in there and pick out the one with the X. Oh, not likely. I'm going to be in that wheelchair. What kind of an invalid am I going to be? Am I going to be in that wheelchair feeling sorry for myself? Can I actually make my life amount to something? And if I'm going to do that, what's that something? What is it that I can do? And I thought, I'll probably be in a wheelchair the rest of my life. But I guarantee you I'm going to do everything I know how to do to try to get that farm back to what it was when I was a kid, with birds and trees and living soil. They took me up and they operated on me for 12 hours. As I stand in front of you tonight, I have no bone on the back of my spinal column. And after they cut it off, they looked and they said, oh, this dude does have the tumor on the inside of the cord. They split the covering on the cord. Not only was it on the inside, but it was under the cord. They could not pick the cord up to get to the tumor. All they could do is pick a nerve and cut it. Hope the tumor was attached like a fish on a line. They picked one, they cut it. They took out a tumor the size of my thumb. I knew when I went into that operating room, when I woke up in intensive care and I said to the nurse, how was the operation? I knew she was going to say, it was terrific, it was wonderful, everything was fine. When my doctor came in and I would say to him, hey, Alex, how was it? He's going to say, hey, it was great, no complications. But I wanted to know, how would I know? How would I know? Well, I knew going into that operation I couldn't feel the foot of the bed. And I made up my mind, when I woke up in the intensive care, the first thing I was going to do was reach out with my foot and see if I could feel the foot of the bed. I wouldn't need to ask anybody if I could feel it. And I woke up in intensive care, and the first thing I heard was a nurse saying to me, Mr. Lyman, you have to move up in the bed. And I will never forget what I said to her. There will never be a day like that, because I can feel the foot of the bed. I was there in intensive care. I couldn't turn over. I was propped up in one position, and right across from me in intensive care, there was an individual dying of kidney failure. And here I am in intensive care with the greatest euphoria I've ever had in my life because I can feel the foot of the bed, and I'm looking at an individual minute by minute that is dying. And I'm happy for myself, and I see that life ebbing away. And I made up my mind that never again in my life, never again will I chase the dollars. Never will I try to see if I'm the biggest farmer, the best farmer, the richest farmer. I will try and repay the gift that I was given, the opportunity to walk again. I walked out of the hospital in 1979, but I knew that what I had learned at Montana State University, Better Living Through Chemistry, was nothing more than brainwashing. I knew that I had to go and re-educate myself. And remember, this is Montana. In Montana, you're better off riding a stolen horse than somebody calling you a vegetarian. Well, I got Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring, and I read it, and the first time in my life, I knew what was happening to the birds and the trees and the living soil. And then Francis Moore LePay and Wendell Berry and Thomas Berry. I was thrilled to death. I couldn't hardly wait to go and share that information with my banker because I needed to borrow some money. 7,000 head of cattle, 30 employees, 2 years of being paralyzed and recovering. I don't need to tell you the shape of my farm. And I went and saw my banker, and I said to my banker, I said to him, I need your help. I need to borrow some money. We need to start farming with nature. And my banker, he reared back in his chair and said, what in the world does that mean? And I said, we need to become organic farmers. And my banker, he looked at me and he laughed. He said, you think I'm going to lend you money? And you're not going to spend it with my other customers, the chemical dealer, the pharmaceutical dealer, the fertilizer dealer? So in 1983, I sold my farm, I paid my debts, but I didn't give up on what I set out to do. I kept working with other farmers, and believe it or not, 1987, the phone rang, and I got a call. And they said, how would you like to go to Washington, D.C. and work on Capitol Hill? Oh, thank you, God. 535 members of Congress. I just knew they wanted to do what was right. Well, I went to Washington, D.C. I worked 5 years on Capitol Hill. And if you remember nothing else that I say tonight, remember what I learned, a thing in Washington, D.C. called the Golden Rule. Them that got the gold make the rules. And after 5 years, I said to my friends, I said, hey, this game is rigged. The deck is marked. We're never going to learn anything here. And my friends, they all looked at me and said, what are you going to do? Go talk to the people? And I said, yeah. There's only one word that strikes fear into the hearts of elected politicians, and that one word is unemployment. Theirs. And so I go around and I talk to people now. Last year I was on 3,000 radio stations, 400 television stations. I gave hundreds of lectures. Believe it or not, I did radio and television in 200 countries. And on top of that, I was on the Oprah Winfrey Show. Wow. You know, I had flown over to England at the same time the Minister of Health had announced to the English people they could no longer assure the English people that mad cow disease could not be transferred from cows to humans. I mean, it absolutely stopped that country. I did 70 press interviews over there in 9 days. And when I came back from England, I was a celebrity. And I got off of the airplane in New York City, a celebrity. And I was walking down the runway and I heard over the loudspeaker, Howard Lyman, pick up a white paging telephone. Being a celebrity, I looked to my entourage. I was alone. I picked up the phone. It was Oprah Winfrey. Oprah said, how would you like to come to Chicago and talk about mad cow disease? Well, I'll tell you right now, being a celebrity, I did not jump at that opportunity. I waited 4 or 5 seconds before I said yes. She sent me a ticket and I flew to Chicago. I'm walking away from the airplane down the runway. I'm carrying my suit, and here's a guy standing out there, a blue suit, a limo driver's hat, and it's got a sign, and the sign says, Lyman. I said to him, can you give me 5 minutes? I'd like to find somebody with a camera. I'd like to get a picture of this. And he said, no. He took me out, and I guarantee you this is true. He took me out and he put me in a limo. And it was so long, I had a phone to talk to the driver. Could have put a bowling alley in there. I was embarrassed. Luckily, the windows were frosted, nobody could see. They took me down and put me in a suite, larger than the house I was raised in with my parents, 2 sisters and a brother. I'm telling you what, the next morning I'm up early, I got my suit on, I'm downstairs, my limo is waiting for me. I jump in and I go and see Oprah Winfrey for the first time. The first thing she says to me, she says, do you know, I saw the movie Babe 5 times. She said, I'll never again eat pork. Hey, right on. Well, I go out there. They put me on the stage, and lo and behold, the guy right next to me is from the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. To the other side of me is a lady from England whose granddaughter is dying, a new variety, CJD. Well, I have to tell you, being in front of 20 million people is a little daunting, but I gutted it out, and I sit there with that frozen smile on my face. And Oprah said words that I will never forget the rest of my life. Here's a man who believes that within 10 years, we could have a disease that would make AIDS look like the common cold. And I said, absolutely. And she says, wow. And I said, yeah, we got 14% of all cows by volume are ground up, turned into feed, and fed back to other cows. Well, she turns to the guy from the National Cattlemen's Beef Association sitting on the steps and says to him, she says, that's an extreme statement. Is that true? And Dr. Gary Weber uttered those memorable words. A limited amount of that's going on. And then a guy from USDA in the front row, Dr. Will Houston, and Oprah says to him, that's an extreme statement. Is Howard right? And Dr. Will Houston says, Howard Lyman is what makes America great. Well, I knew there were things called food disparagement laws. 13 states have laws that says you cannot say what you know to be false about a perishable commodity. Well, I wasn't worried about that. I wasn't saying anything I knew to be false. And after we got done taping the show, I walked up to Oprah and I said to her, I said, hey, Oprah, give me 10 minutes. I'll get you off a chicken. And Oprah said, only 1 animal a day. Well, I didn't think much about it. I went on with my business, never thought there would be any ramifications from that, and a few weeks later, I got a call. It was one of these news magazines, and they called me up and they said, do you realize you're being sued with Oprah Winfrey and Harpo Production by a group of Texas cattlemen? I said, no, I didn't know that. Let me put you on hold. I put them on hold. I raced into my library. I inventoried my vegetarian cookbooks. I knew those cattlemen wanted those vegetarian cookbooks bad. I went back and I said to him on the phone, I said, I gotta go. I gotta call Oprah. And so I called and I left a message for Oprah, and I said to her, I said, Oprah, we lose this suit, I'm throwing in my vegetarian cookbooks. You gotta put up the money. Well, I really wasn't worried. You know, every word that I said on that show, don't feed cows to cows, every major health organization in the world concurred with me. 6 months before going to trial in Amarillo, Texas, USDA and FDA passed laws that we would no longer feed cows to cows. I thought we'd go to Amarillo, Texas. I'd have a nice vacation. We'd go there. The judge would look at this. She would say, case dismissed, no problem. Well, I got to Amarillo, Texas. 25% of all the fed cattle in the United States come from Amarillo, Texas. 120 feedlots surrounding Amarillo, Texas, averaging 55,000 head of cattle. The largest employer in Amarillo is a slaughterhouse killing animals. You ride up in an elevator in any building in Amarillo, you can smell the feedlots and the boots of the people in the elevator. Now, Amarillo, Texas is not the end of the world, but it is clearly visible from there. Now, if you're going to give the world an enema, take the hose, go to Amarillo. Well, we walked into court. I really wasn't worried. And we said to the judge, you know, at this time, the president of the Chamber of Commerce had out a memo and said, we will not roll out the red carpet for Oprah Winfrey. We totally support the cattlemen. There were bumper stickers that said, the only mad cow in Texas is named Oprah. Well, we said to the judge, this is definitely a biased community. We'd like a change of venue. And she said, denied. And they marched in the jury pool from 22 rural counties. I mean, you never saw so many hats, boots, and belt buckles in all your life. We could have melted down all of the belt buckles and put hubcaps on every 1935 Ford ever built. Wow. I was starting to sweat. Now, this jury pool, we had 6 cuts, 6 people that we could exclude. The judge, first thing, said, is there anybody in the jury pool that think the cattlemen are right? 2 people raised their hands. The judge, she excused them. Oh boy, we got rid of them 2. And then she says, is there anybody here that believe that the defendants and Oprah Winfrey are right? 2 other people raised their hands. Oh my God, the only 2 people in Texas, they're going to excuse them? Couldn't you keep your hand down? Here we were, 6 cuts. Never forget. Front row, a lady, her brother owned a feedlot. Her husband worked for a company that manufactured equipment that metered ground up cows into cattle feed. And the judge said to her, can you give an unbiased opinion? And this lady was there. She wanted on the jury so bad she was frothing at the mouth. And she said, oh yes, Your Honor. I guarantee you the first cut, she was out of there. Well, the first day, we ended up with 12 jurors. And we looked at it and said, oh my God, we're in trouble. But you know, that night we made the first decision. We decided that night that the chances we had of winning were probably less than 1 in 100. We decided that night to write the appeal the first night and make sure that every piece of paper that was needed for the appeal was in the court record. And then the second decision. You know, they say that every first-class lawyer in a 30-year career will have one case like the Oprah Winfrey case in 30 years. Well, Oprah brought some resources to the trial. And she brought a consultant, and the consultant had 7 cases like that per year. And he told us the first night, he said, you know, I got to talk to you. He says, we have 12 jurors from rural Texas. He says those 12 jurors every Sunday will be in church. Every member of the congregation, every one of their friends and their family will know they're on the jury. They will know that the jury has to vote unanimously. And if they vote for the defendants to be not liable, they're going to have to explain it to every member of their congregation, their family, and their friends. And he said, we can defend this case on the facts. And we'll bring in all kinds of leaders around the world, and they will stand up and say, everything that you said was factual. And the plaintiffs, they'll bring in people from Texas A&M or some other school, and they'll say, well, it's not quite cut and dried like that. And the jury won't know which way to go. Or we can defend it on the science. And we bring in people from NIH or CDC or England. We'll bring them in, and they will testify to the factual situation of the science. And they'll bring in scientists that said, oh, wait a minute now, that's not been proven. He said, or we can defend this case on the right of free speech. So that when they look in the eyes of every one of their fellow parishioners and their family and their friends, and they can say, of course we voted them not liable, and we did it for you, for your right of free speech. And that night, the first night, we decided to defend the case on the right of free speech. The plaintiffs, they brought in expert after expert. And our strategy was to get their experts to concur with what I said as facts. I made 11 statements on the show. 8 of them were factually based. 2 of them were going to be tough. And the other one that was out there, we didn't know what we were going to do with it. But you know, little by little, you remember Dr. Will Houston was sitting in the front row and said, Howard Lyman is what makes America great? Well, we deposed him in Baltimore under oath. And he admitted that everything I said on that show was true, except for one thing. The statement I made on 14% of the cows, he thought maybe it was closer to 13.5% of the cows. Well, the plaintiffs hired him as an expert witness, paid him $25,000. And he came down on the stand and said every word that I said and Oprah said were lies. And we said to him, wait a minute, aren't you the guy on the show that said Howard Lyman is what makes America great? Aren't you the guy in Baltimore under oath that concurred with everything we said? And by the time we were done, he was on the stand and he was crying. Well, it went like this, day after day. Of the 8 factual statements, we got the experts from the plaintiff's side to admit they were true. That left us with the first statement, remember? Oh, how in God's world are we going to defend this? Here's a man who believes that within 10 years we could have a disease that would make age look like a common cold. How in the world do you ever defend that? Let's go down, let's break it up. The first part of it, here's a man who believes my opinion. Within 10 years, a future event. The Supreme Court said there can be no facts of a future event. I can stand here and say to you right now, Michigan will not win a football game next year. And my opinion is just as good as all of the rest of you out there that don't agree with me. Because the Supreme Court said there can be no facts on a future event. And then the word that the case hinged on, Oprah said, here's a man who believes that within 10 years we could, a possibility. And the Supreme Court said, your opinion on a future event, on a possibility, you cannot find somebody liable. Wow. We took care of that. And then the next one. Oh, I didn't know what the hell we were going to do here. And I said, why are we doing it? We're doing it because the greedy have the ear of government instead of the needy. And the plaintiff said, who are the greedy? Are those the plaintiffs? Are that who you're talking about? And I said, wait a minute. I never knew the plaintiffs. I didn't know they existed. And they said, well, who are the needy? And I said, the American people, the consumers, and probably all of the members of the jury. And the Supreme Court said that that statement is what's called hyperbole. Now, I wouldn't know hyperbole if it ran me over at the intersection. But the Supreme Court says flowery language, you cannot be held liable for flowery language. Well, of course that's hyperbole. Wow. 8 factual statements off of the board. The 2 the Supreme Court says I can't be held liable for, it leaves 1 statement. The statement I made that said any cow that's not staggering goes into the slaughterhouse. And the cattleman said any cow that is staggering can't go into the slaughterhouse. I said that's the same thing. They said, oh no. But we found a government study about non-ambulatory animals. And believe it or not, in the court record, the plaintiff's attorneys said a non-ambulatory animal is one that shows up at the slaughterhouse in an ambulance. I'm not pulling your leg, really. We said, no, a non-ambulatory animal is one that is not walking. And the government said, not only do they go into the slaughterhouse, they're drug in there. And so every statement I said was covered. Here we were, the plaintiffs, after 4 weeks, they finally rested their case. And we said to the judge, Your Honor, we would like you to dismiss the case. The plaintiffs expected the judge would pick up her hammer and say, motion denied, put on the defense. But she didn't. She looked at the jury and said, you can go home tomorrow. I'll have the lawyers in here and we'll talk about this and why we should dismiss the case. You look over at the plaintiffs and you could scrape their face up off of the floor. They knew they were in trouble. Well, the next day in the court, the lawyers were there and they were talking about of and concerning and Sullivan and New York Times and all. I don't know what they were talking about. Sounded good to me. And the judge says, tomorrow I will announce my opinion to the jury. Right on, judge. Throw it out. Throw it out. Next morning, the jury is back, and the judge looks at them and says to the jury, you will no longer consider the Texas food disparagement law. The plaintiffs have had 4 weeks, and they have not shown that any one of the defendants knew any statement they made was false. And then she gutted the law, and she said, I do not believe any animal that is walking is perishable. Oh, throw it out, judge, throw it out. Hey, let's go, we're out of here. And then the judge said, I will allow the plaintiffs to continue on normal business disparagement. Oh, we had to go on with the case. The defense took 4 days. 4 days. And at the end of 4 days, we rested. The plaintiffs were still waiting for us to call all of the experts and everything, and we didn't, because we were using their experts. And the judge said, I will meet with the attorneys this afternoon and we'll put together the jury charge tomorrow morning. We'll have closing arguments, give the charge to the jury, and at noon the case will go to the jury. Well, the next morning, everything that we wanted in the jury charge was in it. Everything the plaintiffs wanted in the jury charge was in it. We ended up with the closing arguments. The plaintiffs' attorneys did a superb job. So did the defense. And then the judge took the jury charge and she read it to the jury, and it was 8 pages long. And she said to the jury, on page 1, across the top, it says Oprah Winfrey, Harpo Production, and Howard Lyman. And down the side, it said Paul Engler, Cactus Feeders, Texas Beef, Dripping Springs, Maltese Cross. And under each one was a little box, and you have to put in there yes or no, liable or not. And if everything on page 1 is no, you don't have to go to page 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Well, the night before that, a lawyer for the defendants had gone through the jury charge, and we had found every uncommon word that was there. We bought a dictionary, and we marked the dictionary with every uncommon word that was in the jury charge. The case went to the jury at 1 o'clock. An hour later, they came back and said, Your Honor, we would like a dictionary. The plaintiff said, okay with us, and the defense said, here, take ours. An hour later, they came back and said, we'd like to see the show one more time. Right on, let's get this thing over. But at 5:15, the jury retires. Oh, man, this is open and shut. What are they doing in there? They're trying to get another free meal? What's happening? Next morning at 9 o'clock, they're back. I'm in the defense room. I'm playing Scrabble with Oprah Winfrey. I'll tell you right now, do not play Scrabble with Oprah Winfrey. 10:15, the jury has reached a verdict. Wow. I go back into the courtroom. I sit down. Somebody has replaced every bone in my body with spaghetti. The jury comes back. The judge says, have you reached a verdict? And the jury said, we have, Your Honor. And she said, give it to the bailiff. The bailiff gave it to the judge, and the judge looked over the top of his glasses at me, and he smiled. She reads, page 1. Don't go to page 2, Judge. Don't go to page 2. Everything's on page 1 is no, you don't have to go to page 2. Please, God, never, I'll be good the rest of my life. Don't go to page 2. She looks over her glasses at me again and goes to page 2. Oh my God, somebody's going down. Page 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Oh. The judge goes back to page 1. She says, Oprah Winfrey. Paul Engler, no. Cactus Feeders, no. Texas Beef, no. Dripping Springs, no. Maltese Cross, no. Oprah is out of there. She's got a death grip on her attorney. She doesn't know whether no is no or no is yes. And she's saying to me, did we win or lose? And he is saying to her, shh. Then the judge goes to Harpo. And she says, Harpo Production, Paul Engler, no. Cactus Feeders, no. Dripping Springs, no. Texas Beef, no. Maltese Cross, no. They're out of there. There is only one sucker left. Boy, I hope that appeal we wrote is a good one. The judge, he looks over at me and smiles. She says, Defendant Lyman. Paul Engler, no. Texas Beef, no. Cactus Feeders, no. Dripping Springs, no. Maltese Cross. That old woman took 10 years off of my life, and she knew when she read page 1 that it was all no, but she went to page 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. My God, I lost 10 years of my life right then, and then she said, the jury finds the defendants not liable. Wow. 6 weeks in court. We probably spent more money in the defense than what we were being sued for. The cattlemen probably spent more money on their side than what they were suing us for. But I will tell you right now, this had nothing to do with beef disparagement. What this had to do with was the right of free speech. They really thought with enough money they could go and intimidate myself and Oprah Winfrey. The cattlemen have appealed the case. We will be in court at least a year before the appeal is heard. Another 130 cattlemen went 40 miles up the road into state court, and they filed a suit against Oprah, Harpo Production, and myself again. And they said on the courthouse steps, we're doing this because this judge is up for election every 4 years, and we believe that he will not be swayed by a celebrity. But I hope you all understand that what I do, what I go around and I talk to people about, not that you should do what I say, not that I point at you and say this is exactly what you ought to do because I have one finger pointed at you and 3 back at me. It's all about my opinion, telling you what you should consider, that you should go and take a look at it. Can you imagine what it would be like if somebody passed a law and said you cannot go to Borges Hospital and go into the CHIP program? That's what this is all about. You know, being from Montana, my picture was on the front page of my hometown newspaper. And under the picture it said, Montana's most famous vegetarian. I picked up the phone and called him up and I said, why don't you tell it the way it is? Montana's only vegetarian. And they said, no, We have an editor on the paper here is one of you kind of guys, so we know there are at least 2 in the state. Well, there's nowhere in the world that I'd rather be than here tonight. You are the bearers of the candles that are lighting the way, not only for Michigan, not only for North America, but for the world. We are going to have to change the way we eat. We're going to have to change the way we provide health care. And if we look at it, according to the Surgeon General, 7 out of every 10 Americans dying today are dying from something associated with their diet. 1 out of 2 with heart disease. Main contributing factors, saturated fat and cholesterol. The majority of saturated fat and cholesterol that gets into your body gets there in the form of animal products. 1 out of every 3 Americans will have cancer. 1 out of every 4 will die of cancer. According to USDA, 75% of all carcinogens and toxins that get into the human body get there in the form of animal products. I stand in front of you tonight, an ex-cattleman. On the stand in Texas, they admitted that they considered me to be public enemy number 1. We have seen the consumption of beef going from 95 pounds to 65 pounds. They're suing me because they are losing. What you are doing in leading the way, not by going out and becoming flaming vegans, but by showing people that you can live longer and better by doing better tomorrow than you did today. I will tell you right now that the 3,000 chippers in Kalamazoo are the most important people in the world, because 80% of the people in the world are part of the herd. They march nose to tail, and when you march nose to tail, you only see one thing in front of you. But 20% of the people are thinking. You're part of that 20%. And when the majority of that 20% make a change, I guarantee you the world will make a change. And if he lives long enough, I'll guarantee you within 20 years, Rush Limbaugh will be on the air swearing up and down he led the vegetarian revolution in America. Some things are hard to believe, aren't they? But when you walk out of here tonight, do me a favor. Do not do what I did. You know, I was well over 300 pounds. My blood pressure was sky high. My cholesterol was over 300. I'd sit down and have lunch and my nose would bleed. I knew I had to make a change. But I could not utter the word vegetarian. So I decided I'd become the world's worst vegetarian, but I wouldn't tell anybody about it. And for 1 year, all I ate was lettuce and dairy products. I lost some weight. My blood pressure came down slightly. My cholesterol came down slightly. And after a year, I thought, if I can do that, being the world's worst vegetarian, just think what I could do if I didn't eat any animal products. I lost over 130 pounds. My blood pressure is normal. My cholesterol went from 300 to 135. I was thrilled to death. I couldn't hardly wait to share it with my friends, my family. I've been married for 30 years, and 30 years, never one day did I ever regret marrying my wife. She can't say that, but I married better than she did. But I will tell you, in 30 years, she came with a mother that has been a severe test. And here I thought I had the answer. I wanted to share it with my friends, my family. And I thought about sharing it with my mother-in-law, even though it had the potential to extend her life. Well, I called her up and I said, "Hey, Marge, I'm on this wonderful new diet," and I heard the phone go click. And I learned something. They're not ready to learn until they ask you. Walk out of here tonight. Walk out proud. But remember what you did for yourself. And when somebody taps you on the shoulder and says, "Are you one of those chippers?" turn around and then tell them about it. You are special people. Borges Hospital. I can't take my hat off enough for a healthcare organization to lead the way in the world. It is phenomenal. The world will change. It will change for the better. There will be a future for our children and grandchildren because of what all of you have done. If I can make the change, anybody can make the change. And so when you look at it, and you want to say to somebody, well, the reason that I did it is I met a doggone dumb old cattleman, and if he could do it, I knew it was a piece of cake for me. Out in front tonight, they are selling my book. You don't all have to buy a book, but you cannot leave the hotel without one. Nah, I'm just joking with you. But what I would like to do is anybody here that would like, that if you buy a book, I would autograph it. If anybody here would like one of my business cards, I'll give you one. It has my 1-800 number, my phone number, my email address. I want to stay in touch with people like you because you are special. The rest of my life, I will never forget this night. You are the candles leading the way. Thank you very much.